So we have to start. Let's say we have to wait for the 2 to 3 minutes. Only few students are left. Just a minute. Have to wait for 2 minutes. Good morning. Good morning. Oh, thank you. God. Now we have to start. In the last class, we covered the term what is managerial economics and why we have to study the term managerial economics, the meaning of the managerial economics, how it is related to the other branches of economics, and how it plays an important role in the decisions making. Then after that, we also enter into the term, the first lessons of it, that is called the demand, the meaning of demand, and what are the different types of demands are there, like composite demand, joint demand, complementary demand, substitute, and so on. The different varieties of the demands are there. We covered those parts. Today we have to start with that demand functions, law of demand, till the elasticity of demand. Okay. Right now, we start sharing my slide. Okay, that's one. So here we went to the term what is the demand functions. Actually, the demand functions means what are the component on which the law of demand, I mean the demand is to be depends upon. If you take into account the demand of a particular product, suppose you demand certain things. Suppose you demand for a television. On what are the most important component on which the television set is to be demanded? First of all, we know its price. What is the price of the different televisions are there? Then income of the consumer, those who try to consuming it, what the purchasing power of that particular persons. Whether the persons prefer that particular terms, that the preferences are there, taste also with that. Then whether that particular term it be in the fashion or not so, right? And the what are the other prices available for the substitute or the complementary type of products. So these are the different component on which the demand is to be depends upon. So when you put in the name, algebraically, the demand for a product X, that is a functions of price of X, income, taste, preferences, fashions, price of other related commodities, means the price of substitute as well as the price of complement. Now, after knowing it, what the law of demand basically did explain. Law of demand tells us other things being constant, or it is same. The demand will be more when price is less, and demand will be less when price is more. So that reflect that other things being constant, when price increases, demand falls, and when price falls, demand increases. That means if you back to the equations, here we know the term, let's say the demand of a particular product. Let's say the demand of X. Demand of X is depending upon its price, where we take into account other factor to be remains constant. And that implies that when price of the product, when we take into account the price of that particular product to be increases, then what happened to the demand? The demand for that particular product, definitely it will reduces. So there existence of an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. When price falls, similarly, when price falls, demand increases. That is the law. But that law, considering the other factors to be remains constant, right? Now, after knowing the definitions part of it, move to the next concept. What is demand schedule and demand curve? When we elaborate or when we explain the law of demand with the help of a table in the sense, let for example that the different prices a particular consumer consumes different amount of the commodity. So when we put in a tabular form, and that represents the demand schedule. So demand schedule means it is a tabular representation of law of demand. Similarly, when you put graphical representation of the law of demand, then it is called the demand curve. And that curve also may tells us the inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. Now, after knowing the term what is demand schedule and demand curve, let's we have to explain it with the help of a numerical examples. Suppose we take into account the demand. Let's say these are the demand points are there on the curve. That is to be forget that part. Take the second column and the third column. Second column tells us the price of, I mean the per unit cost. That is the price. Okay, that is a per unit price of a cup. Let's say maybe the cup of coffee, or you can take into account the price of the cup of tea. If the price of rupees 10 per cup, then the demand increases from 15 to the 20. The demand reduces, right? From 15 to 20, the price increases means demand fall from 50 to 40. Similarly, when further price falls from 20 to 25, I mean if it rises from 20 to 25, then the demand further reduces from 40 to 30,000 and so on. When we plot these things, this is the demand schedule. Remember, this is the demand schedule. So that reflects what it represents, then the inverse relationship between the price and quantity demand, the law of demand. When this is the things, the price to be increases, and what we find, the demand for the commodity to be reduces. So this particular two column represent the demand schedule. That the tabular representation of the law of demand is called the demand schedule. When we plot on the graph, let's say we take into account on the horizontal axis the price of a cup of coffee to be there, and vertical axis we take into account the that is called the price, that is the price of the coffee. Now, first we have to start with the first point, that is the 15 and 50. That is the when price per cup is to be 15 rupees, 50,000 to be demanded, right? On the horizontal axis to 50, 10, 20, 30, 40. These are the in terms of thousands units, right? Now, when we putting one by one of it, the point A, point B, point C, like that. Let's say point A, 15 with 50. Similarly, point B, it is 20 with 40. If you take the point C, it is 25 with the 30, and the point D, it is 30 with 40. And when price for the increases to the 35, demand reduces to the 10,000 units. So when we join all the points A, B, C, D, E, then we find a curve that is called as the demand curve, right? So this is the demand curve. So it depicts the inverse relationship between the price and quantity demanded. When price increases, quantity demand reduces, right? Quantity demand reduces, and vice versa. When price falls, if you take into account when price falls, demand to be increases. So there existence of the inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. So this things is called this particular curve is called the demand curve, right? This is your demand curve. Okay, we take into account this dd is your demand curve. Okay, now let's say what is the individual demand curve and individual demand schedule. When we considering a particular person's individual means individual persons, if you take into account a particular person's demand, let's say assuming his income, taste, preferences, or price of other related commodity, it will always remains constant. Now, that particular person, how it fluctuated its demand when price changes, that will represent that will be called as the individual demand schedule or individual demand curve. Now, let's for example, the price per unit of banana is to be 2 rupees, and a particular consumer demanded 25 units of banana and when the price per unit will be 2 rupees, and the same consumer consume less unit of banana when the price increases from 2 to 4. Similarly, from 4 to 6, further it will reduces. So that represent a how a individual changes its demand corresponding to the different change in price of the product other things being constant, that is called as the individual demand schedule. Similarly, when we depict it on the curve, then it is called the individual demand curve. Okay. Similarly, like in the previous figure, we can put the term 2 with 25, 4 with 20, and so on. We can joining it, we can find a curve to be that. Instead of that, I have to be put directly, and that also represents when price to be fall, quantity demand to be increases, and vice versa. Right? If you take into account initially we are at the point A, and when the price further falls, and when price falls from P1 to P to P1, quantity demand increases from Q to Q1. If you take the reverse of it, initially if you take the point B is there, price is P1, when price increases from P1 to P, quantity demand fall from Q1 to Q, right? So this is the way we can represent the term what is called as the individual demand schedule and individual demand curve. Similarly, in a market, we know there are large number of individuals are there. They're consuming the different unit of, let's say this example, we have to repeat with this example. It is not so the person A, you can take into account this is the individual A, the person A. He demanded at the 25 unit of banana when price is 2 and 20 unit of banana when price is 4 and so on. But it is not the in a market, A is the only one consumer. Beside A, there may be large number of consumers are there of that particular banana. When we add all the individuals, when we add all the individual consumers, we can find the market demand, right? When we add horizontally all individuals demand of the banana corresponding to the different prices, we can find the market demand. That we have to depict right now. Let's say before proceeding in this one, this is the market demand and market demand curve along with the schedule. Here, the persons A demanded 25 unit of banana when price is 2, 20 unit of banana when price is 4 and so on. Individual B also be demanded differently, like it is to be 20 unit of banana when price is 2 and 18 when price is 4 and so on. When we add both the demands, when we add both the person's demand, we find the aggregation of the demand, that is called the market demand. At the price 2 per banana, A consumes 25, B consumes 20, thereby the market demand becomes 45 and so on. Similarly, when we plot these things on the graph, let's say in the first figure, it tells us when price to be falls, demand increases of the individual consumer A. Similarly, in the second figure, this is the for the B consumer B. This is the for the B consumer. This is your A consumer, right? And this is the aggregation of the market demand, the consumer A along with the consumer B, right? You have to add both the person's demand to be there. A's demand is to be here, B's demand, and we have to find a flatter demand curve. And this flatter demand curve represents the market demand, right? So what is called the market demand schedule and market demand curve. Now, how you have to depict with the help of the equations? Let's say we take one mathematical equation to be that. Let's say quantity demand of a product. It is a functions of its price. And here I take into account quantity demand equals to 500 minus 5p. This is the demand law, and that demand law is a downward sloping curve. This is the demand curve to be that, and this curve to be represents 500 minus, this is your D or quantity demand. This is nothing but we can take into account as 500, okay, minus 5p. We take the 500 and minus 5p. But what this minus 5p stands for? Right? P is the price of the product, no doubt. But what the minus 5p? If you take into account this is your demand, and let's say this is the demand and this is your price to be the site, right? If you take into account price of a product to be, assuming it is the let's say 10 rupees. If you take the prices to be 10 rupees, then how much quantity demand to be that? You can putting it here, 10 into 5, it is a 50, then it comes to be the 450. This is a 450, right? Similarly, if you take the price is increases, I mean reduces to the, let's assuming it to the 5 rupees, right? When price falls from the 10 to 5, then it is a 5 means in the 25, right? 500 minus 25 is the 475. So 475. Demand increases 475. So that is the way we have to representing it. And how much price falls? The how many percentage amount of the price falls, and these are how many percentage the demand to be increases, right? That to be depicted by the 5. When 5 in the sense that means the price per unit, if the price is to be, let's assuming the price is 0, when price is 0, demand is how much? Demand is to be 500. So that means this is the autonomous demand. Definitely 500 unit to be demanded even though the price is to be 0. When price is to be, let's say, increases to the 5 rupees, then let's say we have to increase one by one. Let's say the price is increases by 1 rupee, quantity demand to be reduced by 5 units. That is the 495. Okay, we can take into account 495. Why it is the 495? Because when you put the value p as a 1, then 500 minus 5 to be 495. When the price to be moved to, let's say, the 2 rupees, then it becomes 490. That means when prices increases by 1 rupee, then demand reduces by 5 units. And that is the slope of the demand curve. This is minus 5 with the slope of the demand curve. If you know the equations, y straight line equations, y equals to mx plus c, y equals to mx plus c. Here c is the intercept, and this is the 500 is the intercept, and m is the slope. Slope is to be the minus 5, and the slope is the negative. That means negatively demand curve. Slope to be negative. That negative tells us the inverse relationship between the price and quantity demanded. Okay. Now, after knowing these particular terms in terms of your equations and how to interpreting it, moves to the next concept. What are the I mean, in which situation the demand law is not to be going to be holds good. That means what are the exceptions of the law of demand? The exception of the law of demand means we know when price increases, demand fall. That is the general concept. When if you take into account a demand curve to be here, and we know the demand curve to be downward sloping. That represent that when price falls, demand increases. So inverse relationship to be takes place. But in what are the situation this thing is not going to be holds good, like for example, as you know the demand, I mean price of the petrol to be increases day by day, but demand also increases day by day. So in that case the law of demand not going to be holds good. Similarly, if you take into account the salt, if the salt price to be increases, right, salt price if it increases, let's say 20 rupees or 30 rupees to 50 rupees, 50 rupees to 100 rupees, the amount of the salt you purchase per month, it will remain the same. It should not be increased or it should not be decreased. If the price to be falls up, if the price of the salt to be decreases, that does not mean you have to purchase 1 quintal 2 quintals of salt and using in your dishes. No, it is not so. So that means in some cases the law of demand not going to be holds good. Then what are the exceptions are when it is not applicable? The first, the most important point is the inferior type of commodities. Inferior type of commodities means uh, that is, for example, the potato, right? It is not so the price of the potato increases, I mean price of the potato increases, still then we have to demand to increase. If the price of potato be reduces, then still then you have to reduce the potato. It's not going to be applied everywhere, right? So that is the best example of I mean given by the Sir Robert Giffen. On the basis of his name, it is called the Giffen's paradox. It is a paradoxical nature. Paradoxical nature means the existence of a direct relationship between the price and quantity demanded. Now, after knowing the inferior commodities, next moves to the X, that the expectation of the changes in the future price. Suppose the, you know, like for example, suppose after 15 days, let's say there is a war between India and Pakistan, assuming it. Then what happened? You suddenly rush to the different, I mean, mall or to be shop to be that, to purchase your essential items and so on. Why? Because you know if the war to be takes place, definitely it may be the scare, the product may be the scare, supply is not be there, and the price of those product may be going to be increased in near future. So therefore you rush to the different type of stuff and try to purchase more and more, more than your requirement. Okay, so that is the expectations in the future change in the price. When the price increases, try to purchase more and more. Next is to be fashion. If a product to be in a fashion, definitely at any cost, what are the price to be that, then you are going to be purchasing it, because that represent your status symbol. If there is a status symbol commodities are there, at any cost be that, when the price to be increases, you definitely try to purchase more. If a particular product does not having any kind of status symbol, then what do you find? The demand for those product to be reduces when price to be reduces. Next, okay, possibility of the war you already provide that one with the expectation changes in the future price. Now move to the next point. Point is the ignorance. Ignorance in the sense, you do not suppose as a consumer you are not aware of the terms where the product will be available at what price. Then definitely you have to purchase the things at a higher price, right? So it is so because you are ignorant about the price and the product where it will be available at what price. Therefore, you have to pay more than it's the price will be available at any other places. That means your demand to be increased when price to be increased and so on. Then snob effect, that is called the snob effect or the snubbery effect, or it's called the status symbol commodities, what we already discussed. In the status symbol commodities, definitely the price further going to be increased when demand increases when price increases, and when price falls, demand also reduces. Well-being effect, that is another one, the conspicuous consumptions. If you take into account the conspicuous consumptions, it is a part of a necessary commodities like your alcohol for a alcoholist. If you take into account the cigar, those are the smoker, right? Those are the consuming good car and so on. Even those price to be increases. Nowadays, what we find, the price of the cigar to be increases, right? Still, then the demand for it is also be increases, and those commodities, those things that we tells us the conspicuous consumptions. In those cases, okay, in those cases, definitely we find the loud demand not going to be holds good, like the statistical commodities. Now, next comes to the terms, next important component is that why the demand to be downward sloping. You know that the demand curve will look like this, but the point is that why demand to be downward sloping? In the previous concept, previous slide, we studied that the what are the exceptions in which situation the demand curve not going to be downward sloping. But the point is to be here, why you consume more when price falls? When the price falls, let's say this is the initial price, let the initial price to be you can take into account the P1 and the quantity demand to be take into account the Q1. When price to be reduces, let the price of the product be falls. Let's say the price of product falls from P1 to the P0. Why quantity demanded increases from Q1 to Q2? What the causes is behind it? When price falls, demand increases. But what are the reason behind it? How you have to identify items. Now, these are the things as to be most important factor behind why the demand curve slopes downward from left to right. Let's start with the first one. Substitutions effect. Substitution effect means, okay, in order to understanding that part, let's say we take one example. Let's say the price of tea and coffee. Let's say the price of tea, it is per cup is to be, let's say, 5 rupees, and price of coffee, let's say the price of coffee, we assuming it to be the 10 rupees. Got it? Now, suppose this is the P1 is the 10 rupees price of coffee. This is the demand for the coffee. You can take into account this is the demand for the coffee, right? When the price is to be false, let's say this is the initial price, that the price of coffee for coffee is to be 10 rupees, and there are existence of the 100 consumers are there initially, and when rupees the demand increases from 100 to, let's say, the 120. But the point is that why demand increases? When price falls, from the 10 to 7, demand increases from 100 to 120. But what are the reason behind it? I take the point, it's called the substitution effect. Now, When the price of a product will fall from 10 to the 7 rupees, cheaper as compared to this one, we know that price of tea is higher than 7 rupees. We know that price of tea is 5 rupees. 5 is less than 7. But we have to compare the previous situation. Previous situation, price of coffee is to be 10 rupees and price of tea is to be 5 rupees. Now, what happened to the coffee? Coffee price reduces to the 7 rupees. 7 definitely more than 5. 7 definitely more than 5. But we can say comparatively, coffee is to be cheaper than tea. And for that reason, those who are consume initially tea, they try to consume coffee. Therefore, the consumption of coffee to be increases. So that is called the substitution effect. So what is written that when the price of a commodity fall, its substitute become more expensive. Okay, substitute means if the type, let's say price of coffee to be reduces. Now we can believe that tea is a dearer one. Dearer means the expensive one. Even though the 5 is to be less than 7, right? But comparatively, we can say that tea is to be costlier one. So therefore, when those consumers who consumes tea, they try to substitute instead of consuming tea, they try to consume coffee. And that's the concept why the demand increases when price falls. Now move to the second point. That is called the income effect. When we find the price of a particular commodity to be reduces, its real income increases. For example, let's say continuing the same example, let us change it. Let's say this is to be 10 instead of 100 and this is to be 12, let's say this is 12, assuming it. Let's say we're deducting, I mean, so this is, and this is assuming it the 15, not 12, rather assuming it the 15. And we have to forget this tea. We just concentrate the coffee. Initially, when price of the coffee is to be 10, a single consumer, not stick to the single consumer, individual consumer. When the price of coffee is to be 10 rupees, a particular consumer consume 10 coffee in a particular day. 10 cup of coffee in a particular day. And during that time period, he is going to be spent 100 rupees. Okay, this is the money income is given. This is the money income what is given to him, it is the 100 rupees. 100 rupees the money income is given, that is fixed there, right? So with the help of the 100 rupees, definitely it is going to be consumed 10 units of coffee, I mean 10 cup of coffee. Now suppose the coffee price to be reduces, right? Let's say coffee price to be reduces instead of 7, let's be assuming the price of coffee reduces to the 5. If the price of coffee to be reduces 5, then tell me how much unit to be consumer consume to be coffee? Definitely is going to be consumed 20 unit of coffee. It is going to consume 20 unit of coffee. This much of coffee is going to be consumed. Why? Because the income is 300. If the price to be falls to the 5 rupees per cup of coffee, definitely the same consumer in a day who consumed 10 cup of coffee initially, right now he tried to consume 20 cup of coffee because the income is to be 100. Now, the question to be why it is so? It is so because the real income increases. Definitely the money income remains constant, 100 rupees. But its real income, that means the purchasing power of that 100 rupees to be increases. Initially, he consumed 10 cup of coffee, but right now he consumed 20 cup of coffee in a day. Because his purchasing power of 100 rupees is to be increases due to the fall in price of the coffee. Now comes to the next point, that is the law of diminishing marginal utility. Actually, this is a concept. Marginal utility means how a consumer to be actually the marginal utility analysis is to be required in order to study the term consumer behavior. A consumer, how a consumer to be behave. That means suppose how to understand the consumer behavior. Let's assuming suppose if we enter into a movie hall to watching a movie by paying 100 rupees, and one reporter in front of that particular exit door to be there and asks you after that particular watching that movie and how much you're satisfied. Some of you maybe say that yes, I'm fully satisfied. Some say no, I'm not satisfied. But what is the reason? But how to articulating it? You spend 100 rupees. If you say, let's say if the entire 100 rupees to be extracted by watching that movie, it's okay. That means you are fully satisfied. You say, no, I'm not fully satisfied. I lost my 100 rupees and so on. In that case, you have to be satisfied less than 100 rupees. Right? When we express the concept in terms of the monetary units, that's the marginal utility. That means when we explain that, that is not imaginary utility, that is called the utility analysis. That means when we express the utilities, I mean satisfaction in terms of number basis, that is called as the marginal utility analysis, what is called developed by Alfred Marshall. Right? Let another example to be that suppose you have to consuming let's say glasses of water. First glass of water you are satisfied, let's say that 10 unit of satisfaction. Second glass of water, same glass, you obtain 8 unit of satisfaction. If the third glass of the water, you have to be 6 units of satisfaction. If you move to the fourth glass of water, it will be 4 units of satisfaction. If you move to the fifth glass, it may be 2. If you move to the sixth glass, then it becomes 0. If you move to the seventh glass of water, then it becomes -2. That is negative. But the point is that why it is so? Because you have to consume a glass of water, identical glass of water, right? And the inside the water thinks what is there. It is with same taste, same color, and so on. That means, and there is no time gap between the consumption. There is no time lag between the two successive consumptions. Instantly, after consuming one glass of water, how much you satisfy? 10. When you consume the second without any gap, it definitely it reduces, and third and so on. When you move to the sixth glass, you are unable to further entering into it. That means one got not getting any satisfaction. If you move to the next glass, then you find it with a negative. Negative means you are the vomiting to that. You are unable to consuming further glasses of water. So these are the things to the marginal utilities. Right? Marginal utility means addition met the total utility. Initially the total is to be 10. When we move to the second glass, total is to be 18. How much it will be added? 18 less 5, that is 10. And next is to be 24. How much will be added to 18? It is 6. Then is to be 28. How much added to the 24? That is 4. And so on. So this is the 30. And in this situation, you reach your maximum utility. Right? When you're consuming furthermore, your utility to be reduces. Okay, and this the terms the marginal utility, and consumer always obtain the satisfactions when how much price he pay if it is equals to its marginal utility. When it equals to its marginal utility, then we can say the consumer obtain its fully satisfactions. So that means the price is nothing but the marginal utility, and number of commodities to be consumed. This particular column is called the quantity demanded, right? If you express in terms of your law of demand, this is your quantity demanded, and this is your price of the product, right? When price falls, demand increases, right? When price falls, demand increases, and vice versa. That is called the law of diminishing marginal utility. As a person consumes successive unit of a commodity, utility deriving from every unit, that is the next unit, must have to be fall. Okay. Now that for that reason, the demand curve will be downward sloping. Move to the next point. The many use of the commodities. There are certain commodities which have the multiple utilizations, like your coal, like a petrol, like a milk, like a electricity, and the multiple utilizations, right? If the price of those commodity little bit increases, like for example electricity, initially on right now the electricity is to be the per unit or the consumption remains fixed at the 4 rupees per unit. Now if the price increases from 4 to, let's say, 10 rupees per unit, then what you have to do, when you move from a particular room to the another room, you have to switch off all your electric equipments. Why? Because the demand decreases. Why the demand decreases? Because the price increases, right? If a commodity has the multiple utilization, definitely you have to save the energy in that case. When a particular product, when the price to be, let's say, fall, let's say when the price of the electricity to be fall from the 4 rupees to, let's say, 1 rupee, or let's say the 50 paisa per unit, definitely you have to run your all sort of electric equipment instantly everywhere. Each and every room to be run. 24 hour to be, your fan to be on, 24 hour, your electricity on, I mean television to be on, and so on. Why it is so? Because the demand, why the demand increases? Why the demand for the electricity increases? Because the price be reduces. And that the concept of the many use of the commodity. When the price of the commodity falls, the demand of that particular commodity increases if it has multiple utilizations. Then come to the last, the most important point, what is called the bandwagon effect. Bandwagon effect means, let's say, that reflect the imitations. That means always we are imitating the component. Let's say something to be there in advertisement, you have to follow those things without knowing the consequences. Without knowing the consequences, you can find the terms. Let's say the Mountain Dew, right? If you're consuming the Mountain Dew, you can take any kind of risks. Then you can jump from a particular top of the hill to the bottom also, or you can jump from that, let's say, 10-story building to the bottom also. But actually, it is not so. It is not reality. In reality, it's not so. But we feel that yes, if I consuming that, definitely I will feel good activity there, and that says that particular term also be input impact on the demand of a commodity, right? Without knowing the consequences, all to be jump into the consumptions of that particular commodity, and that thing is called as the bandwagon effect. Like you can know the term, ଯଦି ଗୋଟେ ମେଣ୍ଢା ଯଦି ପାଣିକୁ ଡେଇଁବ ସବୁତକ ମେଣ୍ଢା ବି ପାଣିକୁ ଡେଇଁବେ, without knowing the consequences. Without knowing the consequences, it will take place, and that the concept is the bandwagon effect. Okay, so these are the components why the demand curve always downward, slopes downward from left to right. Now move to the next concept, what is called as the increase in demand, decrease in demand, expansion in demand, and contraction in demand. If you take the terms, the demand for a particular product, it depends upon the income, taste, preferences, and so on. Let assuming it, if the price to be remains constant, if price constant, if income increases, what happened to the demand? Just imagine, when price constant, right? Demand for a particular product is increase or decrease? Definitely to be increase. Definitely to be increases. Similarly, when let's say the income falls, price constant, demand for the product definitely to be reduces. Similarly, take the other concept below. If your price constant, taste increases, preference increases. If other factor to be increases, demand for the commodity to be increases. When those things will fall, the demand falls to that commodity to be reduces. That is called as the increase in demand, right? So I have to depicting it. Let's say, for example, this is the demand curve initially. You have to remember price to be remains constant, right? Now, if the price to be constant, then what happens the demand curve? Demand curve increases, right? That is called the increase in demand. Okay, this is called the shift the demand curve upward. Why it is so? Because if you take into account back, this is the initial demand curve to that. Now, what happened? If the income increases, if the other things means if the income increases, what happened to the demand? Definitely demand increases. Assuming it, the price of the product to be P1, right? At that time period, the demand is to be, let's say, it is Q1. Now, income increases. This is the Q1. Let's say income increases. If the income increases corresponding to this particular price, definitely demand increases. Because the demand to be increased, more to be here. At that time period, you have to demand more amount of it. That is from the Q1, you can move to the point in the Q2. And this is called as the increase in demand, right? So that is called the increase in demand, which is otherwise known as the shift the demand curve upward. Similarly, just reverse the concept. When price fall, actually price constant, income fall, or taste falls, or the preference falls, or the patience falls, and so on. If other factor to be reduces, definitely demand to be reduces, and that is called the decrease in demand, and that the demand curve shift downwards, right? This is called the decrease in demand, right? And this is called the demand curve shift downwards. Okay, if you take into the initially, if the initial price to be, assuming it the price to be P1, and corresponding to that quantity demanded to be, let's say, Q1. Suppose if you take the term, if you suppose the price to be remain the same, if income to be false, if your income reduces, what happened to the demand? demand definitely it also be the reduces because your money income falls, you have to consume less unit of demand of it. And that is called the demand curve shift downwards. And that is called the decrease in demand. Okay, now we have to consuming at the same price we have to consuming huge zero unit of commodity. So demand to be reduces, and that is called the decrease in demand or the shift in the demand curve downward sloping. Okay, when you're combining these things, this is called the increase and decrease in demand or the shift in demand curve. Right? Upward shift to the demand curve is called the increase in demand. Downward shift to the demand curve is called the decrease in demand. Now move to the next bit. What is called the extension in demand and contraction in demand. Extension or expansion. Here we have to assume other factor to be constant. Other factor constant. When price increases, you know the law of demand. When price increase, what happened to the demand? And this is called the demand to be definitely fall, right? Demand to be fall of that particular commodity to be fall. Similarly, when price to be fall, demand increases, right? And this is called as the change in quantity demanded. In the previous part is the change in demand. This is called the change in quantity demanded, right? When price falls, demand rises. That is called the extension or expansion in the demand. When price increase, demand fall. That is called the contraction in demand. It's not the decrease, rather the contraction in demand. That is called the extension or expansion in contraction demand. And the both the term is called as the change in quantity demand. The previous concept, increase and decrease in demand, is called the change in demand. Let's say initially the demand is to be here. Now, if the price falls, let's say assuming it, let's say initial price to be P1, corresponding that quantity demand is to be Q1. Let's say the price is P1 and quantity demand is to be Q1. Got it? We are at the point, let's say the A. Now, what happened? When price falls, when price falls from P1 to P2, let's say assuming price falls P0, let's say when price falls P1 to P0, quantity demand increases from Q1 to Q2. Okay, it will be increases from Q1 to Q2. I mean, we move from the point A to the B, and that the concept is called as the extension demand. This rise in demand when price falls, demand rises. This rise in demand is called the extension demand. It's not called the increase in demand. That is called the extension demand. Why? Because the other factors remain constant. Okay, or the movement along the demand curve from the downward movement from A to B to be moves. Right? Similarly, contraction in demand, just reverse of it. Initially, the demand curve to be here. Now, what happened? When price to be increases, let's say assuming the same concept to be here. Suppose we take the price to be P1 and quantity to be Q1. This is the initial situations, right? Now, when price increases, let's say what happened to the demand. When price increases from P1 to P2, quantity demand it will be, let's say it will be falls from Q1 to Q0. Quantity demand will be reduces. And that is called as the when price increase, demand fall or decreases. That is not called as the decrease in demand, rather it is called the contraction in demand. Right? We move from the point, let's say the initially to be A, and right now it is the point is C. Right? So that means A to C to be moves. That is called the upward movement along the demand curve. Okay, upward movement along the demand curve. That is called the extension and contraction in demand. Okay, when you move to the downward, it is called the extension demand. Move upward is called the contraction in demand. Okay, this is also known as the movement along the demand curve or change in quantity demand. The increase and decrease is called as the expansion and contraction, but this is called the movement along the demand curve. Okay. Now we have to move to the next concept. This is the Vanderbilt effect and Snow effect. We already know about it. Okay. Now move to the next concept. What is the elasticity of demand? As you know, the demand. Let's say I take the term demand to be here. the demand curve. This is the demand curve, downward sloping demand curve, right? And on the horizontal axis, it is the price. Sorry, it is the vertical axis, the price, and the horizontal axis is the quantity demanded to be that. This is the quantity demanded, and this is the demand curve, right? Now, you know that when price is to be P1, let's say assuming it, when price is to be P1, quantity demand is to be Q1, right? When price falls from P1 to P0, when price falls from P1 to P0, quantity demand increases from Q1 to Q2. Got it? So that law tells us when price falls, demand increases, right? But how much fall in price, how much demand rises, that does not explain us, because we know the quantity demand of a particular product, it is a function of its income, taste, preferences, and so on. Beside its price, it also be depending upon your income, your taste, your preferences, your, let's say, advertisement expenses, and so on. Got it? Now, the elasticity demand, it tells us how the quantity demand to be changes, how the quantity demand to be changes due to the change in price, due to the change in income, due to the change in advertisement expenses, okay, all the things, or due to the change in the price of other related commodities, right, or other related commodities. These things is called as the elasticity of demand. So elasticity of demand means how the demand to be changes. That means what is the more important to be the degree of responsiveness, degrees of responsiveness of the change in demand to the changes in its determinant. Determinant in the sense either it is the price, income, your advertisement expenses, your price of substitute and complement, and so on. If you study with the price elasticity, that means the demand changes due to the change in price. That is called the price elasticity. When demand changes due to the change in income, income elasticity. Due to the change in advertisement expenses, this is called the advertisement elasticity. If the demand changes due to the change in price of the substitute, then in that case, it is called the cross elasticity. So we have to study about those type of elasticity: price elasticity, income elasticity, advertisement elasticity, and so on, cross elasticities, right? So that thing, because the law of demand only tells us when price falls, demand increases. It does not tell us how many percentage in changes in demand due to the how many percentage change in price, due to the how many percentage change in income, due to the how many percentage change in price of substitute commodities, and so on. While we enter into the elastic demand, we have to study those things. Let's start with the elastic demand. How to defining it? The elastic demand means the degree of responsiveness of the quantity demanded of a commodity to a given change in any of the determinant. Any of the determinant, like in the previous slide, as I take either the determinant to be price, income, advertisement expenses, price of the related commodities, and so on. So the degree of responsiveness of a quantity demanded to of a commodity to a given change in any of the determinant. If the determinant is the price, is called the price elasticity. If the determinant is called the income, is the income elasticity, and so on. Okay, income elasticity, and so on. So that is called as the elasticity of demand. Let's start with the first bit. What is called the price elasticity of demand? This is the price, income, cross, promotional elasticity, or advertisement elasticity. I'll cover one by one of it. Right. Now start with the first concept, what is called the price elasticity of demand. Actually, the price elasticity of demand, it tells us the degree of responsiveness of the demand of a good or a commodity to a change in price of that particular commodity. Or in the other way, proportionate or the percentage change in quantity demanded divided by the proportionate the percentage change in price of the product. We can elaborating in terms of your algebra, that is the delta Q upon Q divided by delta P upon P. When we take the reciprocal of it, then we can find that delta Q upon delta P into P by Q. And those who have knowledge about the derivative, okay, this is called the dq okay, divided by dp, right, into p by q, into p by q. So we have to calculate change in price, I mean change in quantity due to the change in price, right? And that particular term is nothing but the marginal concept. Marginal change in quantity to the due to change in price, and that is nothing but the slope of it. That is the derivative part, right? We have to applying this. We have to study the term, the price elasticity of demand, and always we know the demand curve is a downward sloping curve, and by default its slope to be negative. So obviously we have to take the absolute value of it, the mod of it. We have to take the absolute value of it, the modulus of price elasticity or modulus of the elasticities, because we know the demand is to be varying inversely with the price. Therefore, we take the absolute value of it. Okay. Now moves to what are the different elasticities are there on the basis of the degree or kind. The price elasticity Marshall categorized into 5 different kinds. One is called the perfectly elastic, perfectly inelastic, more elastic or the less elastic. More elastic is called the simply elastic, less elastic is called the inelastic, right? And another bit is called the unitary elasticity of demand. So what are they? We have to one by one, you have to depict and so on. Because you have to take the relationship. Because we know in the previous slide what you find elasticity it can be calculated, that is called the percentage change in quantity demanded, right, divided by percentage change in price of the product. Percentage change in price of the product. Delta Q by delta P. Now we have to judge these things. Which one changes more? Whether your percentage change in quantity is to be either is to be more than or less than or equals to the percentage change in price of the product. We have to study that one, right? If the quantity demanded changes more than this, in first case, elasticity demand to be greater than 1, right? If in the second case, if the percentage change in quantity is to be less than this one, elasticity is to be less than 1. And when both are equal, then you can say elasticity equals to 1, right? There are the 3 types are there. Highly elastic, less elastic, that's called the elastic, and inelastic, that's called the unitary. Beside that, when percentage change in quantity, when percentage change in quantity, I mean, let's say it's the quantity, if the percentage change in quantity equals to 0, this is one situation. Another situation is that percentage change in price is to be 0. Okay, that means if you're taking the first bit, percentage change in quantity is to be 0. In this case, let the example of the salt. You have to consuming a constant amount of the salt. You can consume more or less amount of salt. In that case, elasticity demand becomes how much? It is always equals to 0. Elasticity demand becomes 0. There is no change in the elasticity of demand. Okay, that is called the perfectly inelastic. Whereas in this case, you have to find elasticity demand becomes infinity. As the necessary type of commodities. In case of the necessary type of commodities or the little bit comfort type of commodities, what you find when price little bit we, I mean there is no change in the price, still then you have to demand more and more of it. Okay, so all these things we have to depict with the help of the curve right now. Let's start with the perfectly elastic demand. Here, price elasticity must be equal to infinity. Here, the demand curve to be a horizontal demand curve. In this case, it is a horizontal demand curve. Because at the constant price, we have to demand consume more and more. Here, delta P equals to 0. If the delta P, there is no change in the price. If delta P is 0, but there is no change in the price, we are consuming more and more amount of the quantity. Therefore, elasticity becomes infinity. Move to the next part, that the perfectly inelastic. That means by the delta Q to be tends to be 0. If the delta Q means that the constant price, we have, I mean, there's a different change in the price of the product, but we have to consuming a constant amount of the quantity, like your salt. In this situation, it to be a vertical straight line demand curve, and the elasticity becomes 0, right? In the previous one, this the elasticity becomes infinity, and here the elasticity becomes 0. Okay, move to the other 3. Start with the highly elastic demand or simply elastic demand. Here the percentage change in quantity is more than the percentage change in the price of the product. Due to that, your elasticity demand or the price elasticity demand to be greater than 1. Right? Here the demand curve to be a flatter demand curve. Here the demand curve to be a flatter. Market. The change in quantity is much more than the change in price. The percentage change in quantity is more than percentage change in price. Therefore, it's the highly elastic demand. Move to the next bit. Unitary elastic demand. Unitary elastic demand means both the terms, that means the numerator as well as the denominator to be both are equal to each other. Both are equal to each other. That means here we have to take into account the terms, that means the change in quantity, percentage change in quantity and the percentage change in price, they are equal to each other. That means the numerator and denominator to be equal, therefore it will be cancelled out, equal to 1. The elasticity equals to 1. Here, the demand curve to be represented a rectangular hyperbola. It is the demand curve to be a rectangular hyperbola. Okay. Now move to the last bit, that is called as the relatively inelastic, or simply it's called the inelastic demand, or you can say the less elastic demand, because this is highly elastic demand. We can say it is the less elastic demand. Less. The same thing. Okay, this is the less elastic demand. Here the demand curve to be a flatter demand curve, but we have to take into account the demand curve is steeper demand curve. Demand curve to be steep. Here the elastic demand to be greater than 1. In this situation, the elastic demand must have to be less than 1. And the curve to be represented like this. Mark the gap. Here this gap is more than this one. But in this case, both are equal. Both are equal. The changes in the quantity and the changes in the price both are equal. But here, the change in price is much more than the change in quantity. That the numerator is less than the denominator. If the numerator is less than the denominator, definitely the fraction, let for example, is the numerator change in that is your change in percentage change in quantity demanded divided the denominator. Okay, if the numerator is greater than the denominator, what happened? The if this is greater, then it is greater than 1. If this is greater, it is less than 1. If both are equal, then it is equal to 1. So these are the three situations are there in case of highly elastic, unitary elastic, and relatively elastic or less elastic. And the previous case, we know it is called as the perfectly elastic demand and perfectly inelastic demand. Okay, they are the 5 different kinds of elasticity of demand. Now, what the different measurements are there for your price elastic demand? Actually, the measurement to be categorized like your percentage method, your expenditure method, that is called otherwise known as the total outlay method, or we can start with the term what is called the arc method. Okay, another bit is with the point method. So that the different methods are there in order to calculate or measure the price elasticity of demand. Okay. Now we have to start with some measurement all out of those. Let's say this is the in a nutshell we have to show all the figure in a single slide. Perfectly elastic, perfectly inelastic, then in the less elastic, more elastic, and then the last one the unitary elasticity. Okay, so we start with the term arc elasticity. So what is the meaning of the arc elasticity? Actually the arc means what? Arc means if you take into account this is a circle to be there, it's not a circle actually. Okay, so let's say we try to make another circle to be there. Try to do it. Okay, no, it is not possible to do with the help of the mouse. Okay, let's say this is a circle to be there, and this is a center, and you know this is a radius and is a diameter. Okay, and this is called the what? You could cross this one, and you could make it this one tangent. Okay, this is the second, right? And this is called internal term is called the chord, right? But if you take into account is just part of a chord, just segregation of a part of it. So that is called as the arc. Arc means it's just a part of a chord. If both the curve, if you take into account the points on a curve have to be nearer to each other. This is the point A and the point B is to be here, right? If the both the point on an arc it will be nearer to each other, then No need to apply the percentage method or the point method. Rather, you have to apply the arc method. Then what is the meaning of the arc? Arc method in the sense we have to take into account the average prices and average quantity demanded. Right? Both the price and both the quantity demanded you have to considering in order to calculating the price. And this is the term delta Q. This is the delta Q means change in quantity demanded. Q2 minus Q1. And this is the delta P. P2 minus P1. It is there as such. But instead of P and Q, this is the Q initially and this is the P we know in our previous formula. But we have to consider the average quantity and average price to calculating the arc elasticity. Okay. So that is the arc method. Arc method to be there if the both the points, I mean, if there is a minute change in the price of the product, if there is a slight change in the price of the product, and both the points have to be nearer to each other, and that means it will be called as the arc. And here, how to calculate the price elasticity on an arc? It is called the arc elasticity. I mean, we have to considering the average price and average quantity demanded of that particular product. So we have to stop it here, and in the coming class, we have to start with the other measurement of your elasticity of demand. Right? What are the other measurements of elasticity demand? We have to like income elasticity, like cross elasticity, and what are the other methods like total outlay method and so on. Those things we have to consider, we have to study in the coming class. So that's all for today. Thank you.